Hello and welcome to the 495. I'm your host, Doug Sparks, editor-in-chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right today. Doing the best I can with what I'm being given.
Okay, all right. That's all we can ask of you.
Yeah.
I'm doing great. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the top. I love this topic. I love the topic on today's show. So I'm of course excited, and I like being in the outdoors. I wish I could be in the outdoors more, but it's maybe at some point. Actually, remote work is interesting, right? Because I have this like fantasy, this daydream of just being able to do editing and writing from a cabin up in the mountains.
Oh, and from a cabin. I thought you were going to say outdoors, and then you see a screen in the sun and forget it. I'm not doing this.
Sure. Although I mean, for sure, during the pandemic, I've literally been outdoors a lot more doing my work.
Sure.
And it's great.
Yep.
It's great. You take your shoes off and let the sun shine down on your face, and
shuffle the deck a little
and there's
bit.
a lot going on in the backyard that you don't notice until you stay out there for a long period, because you get to see like over just what's happened. I can see all the different kind of bird species as they come through. In 1 week, there's like a whole lot of this particular thing, and then those things disappear, and you're a groundhog. There's all sorts of critters that live even in a small yard, and it's just neat to observe them. And the only way you can see what they're up to is if you're patient.
If you spend the time, right?
If you spend the time.
Yeah.
That's right. So one of our guests today isn't with us yet. We're hoping John Judge is going to be able to join us. He's the president and CEO of the Appalachian Mountain Club, which, if you don't know, is America's oldest conservation organization. It started in 1876 in our area in Boston.
1876, nice.
1876, the oldest one. So the guest we have with us is named Amy Lindholm. Amy is the coalition manager of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We're going to find out what that is. And the Northeast regional coordinator of the Appalachian Mountain Club. Amy, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. So just before we get into the Great American Outdoors Act, just real quick, what is the Land and Water Conservation Fund for people who don't know what that is?
Absolutely. Well, we like to call it America's most important conservation and recreation program. It's a federal program that funds a diverse array of projects across the country, and basically allows communities to pick and choose among its different tools to do the kind of conservation work that they want to do in their community, whether they need to protect their drinking water, whether they need to provide expanded access to outdoor recreation opportunities, whether they need to keep forest as forest for either climate purposes, for green space. There's a tool in the box of the Land and Water Conservation Fund for all of these things. And it was created more than 50 years ago, and basically has this really kind of elegant construction. It takes the funds that oil and gas companies pay for the privilege of drilling in federal waters offshore, and reinvests a portion of that profit that belongs to the public in the permanent conservation of land and water and recreational resources for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah. So it's been, at least my understanding as an outsider, it's been a good time after years of kind of struggle, because the Great American Outdoors Act was passed, signed into law in early August. So what can you tell us about the Great American Outdoors Act?
Absolutely. So we're super excited about that, and AMC has been celebrating this victory in the LWCF coalition, and hundreds of groups across the country have been celebrating. So we have been working for full permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. AMC has been working on this for decades, and I've been working with the LWCF coalition on this solidly for the last 10 years. So the Great American Outdoors Act passes into law full permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Yeah. So all of those royalties that are coming into the fund are actually spent on the intended purpose. Over the past 55 years, LWCF has been very successful, but it's been chronically underfunded. And more than half of the money that was set aside for this purpose from those offshore royalties was actually spent on other things. So the Great American Outdoors Act will change that and fully fund LWCF forever. So we're super excited about that.
Yeah,
I just want to let you both know John is with us now.
Okay. And can you hear us, John? Can you hear us?
So, John, say hi.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to continue talking about. We're talking about the Great American Outdoors Act, and I'm speaking with Amy. So people now, John is with us. John Judge is the president and CEO of the Appalachian Mountain Club. We spoke a little bit about your organization, so people are ready to go. So we'll jump right back in with Amy. And so the big question I have about the Outdoors Act is this was like. It passed the House and the Senate by a landslide, and it was very bipartisan. Why was that?
Yeah. The Land and Water Conservation Fund was created in a bipartisan way. It was created under the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration. It's been bipartisan from the very beginning. And it's something that, has something for everyone. So whether you're a climate activist or you're a conservative hunter, there's something in the outdoors for you, and there's something in the Land and Water Conservation Fund for you. So it really brings people together. And we've found at the Appalachian Mountain Club, that the outdoors really unifies us. And that's never been more clear than during the pandemic. And the Land and Water Conservation Fund is an example of what can be done in Congress when you have an issue that unifies people that way.
Yeah. So, John, we spoke a little bit about the LWCF. I'm sure some of our listeners know about the AMC, but they don't know everything. They don't know all the sort of different resources you have and some of the programs you have. So can you tell us a little bit about the AMC, please?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having us on. So the AMC is the country's oldest conservation and outdoors organization. We're founded in 1876, and many folks who've grown up in New England know us well, but we stretch from Maine to Virginia is our service area, and we have just a very robust volunteer corps who have been the backbone of AMC for many decades now. Coming up, it'll be 150 years in 2026. But in addition to over 100 facilities, the high mountain huts that a lot of people know of in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, we do a considerable amount of trail work, including the Bay Circuit Trail around 495, the trail work, the New England Scenic Trail, the Mid-State Trail, and we do a lot of programming too. Getting thousands of folks outdoors, whether it be through our chapter-led programs. We've got 12 chapters, or the professionally run programs that our staff put on. But conservation policy, conservation research is a big part of who we are, and we're doing a number of things on alpine zone research, on stream restoration, on resiliency, whether it be resiliency in and around cities or resiliency in forests. But one of the things we're most proud of is the work that we're doing with Amy. Amy's leading the Land Water Conservation Fund reappropriation, and now that we've got it done, what's the next big thing? And one of the things that she's done is just engaged more than 1,000 organizations and countless thousands of people in picking up the phone and calling their representative, whether it be the House or the Senate, and getting them to act on this. So as you said, it was a great bipartisan victory. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on at an AMC, that we're a nonpartisan organization. So we've got Republicans, Democrats, independents, people who love the outdoors and come to conservation stewardship, usually initially through some fun outdoor experience they've had with us. Maybe it's, learning how to snowshoe for the first time, or coming up and staying over in the huts as a family. So we've tried to instill conservation stewardship in our folks. But the secret sauce is the fun of the outdoors. What brings them to conservation initially is the fun, and keeping them engaged is one of the things we're trying to do.
Yeah. I was looking at outdoors.org, which is your website. And one of the things that struck me was the because I guess I had never connected them in my head until I saw this, is you run a lot of leadership programs. And the idea that the outdoors and training in the outdoors can also be something that teaches you how to lead organizations and lead people, I think is really interesting. I'm reading this book right now called River of Doubt, which is about Teddy Roosevelt's travel on an previously unexplored Amazon tributary and what he went through. But it's also like a story about leadership, right? Like, well, how do you organize people in kind of a difficult situation.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, what's the connection there? Why do you have leadership programs out in the mountains and out in the parks and out in the great outdoors?
Right. Yeah. The leadership training and learning have been part of the AMC from day one. And it started out, as you can imagine, around preparedness. If you're going up in the White Mountains, if you haven't been up there, number one, I'd recommend you go up. But before you go up, you really need to know, what you're getting into. And the White Mountains has had some of the most harsh weather in the world. So, being prepared for different weather conditions, being prepared in the event somebody gets hurt, being able to lead a group. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on in AMC is that all of the leaders that bring out trips, whether they are international trips through our adventure travel program or close to home hikes, they're led by a trained leader. So unlike some of the trips you may sign up through Meetup or online with other folks, if you sign up for an AMC trip, that person is going to be a trained AMC leader. So leadership and leadership training have always been a core in the preparedness realm, and then also on the education front, we're training teachers and youth workers, including folks in Lawrence and Lowell and Boston and Worcester, in outdoor leadership and outdoor learning. So they are getting trained over the course of 4 or 5 days in our outdoor leadership training, or OLT, and knowing some of the basics about how to put up a tent, the basics of leave no trace kind of camping and outdoors, but then also the peer-to-peer leadership, the crisis kind of leadership, things that they need to know. So we're very fortunate that we've got about 16,000 volunteers, one of the biggest volunteer-driven organizations on the East. And I think a large part of that group stays connected with us because they do like the leadership training, and they like the consistency of having that leadership pathway for so many of the folks that come into AMC. There's some consistency in terms of standards of leadership across the 12 chapters that we have. But yeah, it's a really big deal when you think about getting out into the wilderness, whether it be wilderness survival or hiking a mountaintop or being out in the ocean or in the river when a storm comes along. What are you going to do? But yeah, it's a big part of who we are, Doug.
Sure. So I have another question for you, John, and then I want to get back to Amy and talk a little bit about the Outdoors Act. What's available now through the organization? Because I know COVID has changed things. I looked at the website and I wanted to see if I could go out and rent a lodge this weekend. And it seems like some of them are shut down. So what's available now as far as programming? Can I take classes? Can I stay at an AMC lodge? What can I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. This year, we unfortunately had to close down the Appalachian Mountain Club huts, the White Mountain huts. There are 8 of them. Our model is communal living. So, having folks in bunk houses or in bunk rooms, 15 people in a room kind of arrangement at Lakes of the Clouds, that just didn't work, obviously, with physical distancing under COVID. So what we did is we kept them open only for safety reasons. So if you hike up there, we're still doing search and rescue out of there. We're supplying, people can fill up their water bottles. We're supplying lunches. You can use the restrooms. But now we're getting into the fall, so that will change as well. We do have some facilities like the Highland Center, which is Crawford Notch, Bread Woods. You could get a private room there with a private bath, or a private room with a shared bath. That's still open. Many of our main facilities, we've got 3 eco lodges in the Maine woods. So about 5 hours from the Boston area, but well worth the trip. It's really a glorious place. I was up there a couple weeks ago with my family. You can rent a private cabin there. Pinkham Notch, right around the Wildcat ski slope, that's open. Our camp outside of New York called Harriman, that's open, and that's doing quite well. And our camp in the Delaware Water Gap called Mohegan is open as well too. So there are these lodges and cabins that you can book and stay with us, and we'll have many of those open through the winter as well. What we'll probably do, Doug, is maybe just open them up on the weekends when we do have a assurance that there'll be some pretty good demand. But so far, the demand for these single cabins has been very high. It's done quite well. And then, as we've said, we've had to pull back from the bunk room or communal living kind of arrangements. But yeah, we have a lot of facilities still open. And then program-wise, we're doing smaller kind of programs. So if you and your family want to get up and go out with the naturalist, for instance, at the Highland Center, you can do that. Or go out with a small group of, say, 6 to 8 folks. You can do that and learn about the outdoors, or take a guide. There are AMC guides that will bring you up to any of the huts, the lodges. And we continue to do outdoor leadership training. A lot of it has been moved online. We've had over 400 programs that have moved online. So you can take quite a few online training courses. One of the ones, I know snowshoes are tough to find now. I was talking with the head of L.O. Bean yesterday, and they're just, selling out of snowshoes. But if you do own a pair of snowshoes, or interested in snowshoeing this winter, or cross-country skiing, or hiking in the winter, we've got a number of programs that folks can check out the website at outdoors.org and sign up for. But great intro kind of programs.
Yeah, I suspect we're going to see an explosion of interest in snowshoeing, and it's a little scary that people are already buying them up. I wanted to get back into mountain biking at the beginning of COVID, and just kind of casually figured, I should probably go buy a mountain bike, not knowing that when you go into the bike stores, they're completely empty. There's nothing there on the shelves. It's kind of eerie. So maybe we'll see it with snowshoeing, and maybe that's great. I love snowshoeing. So that's where we're at right now. And I'm wondering, there's this enthusiasm, and Amy, this is a question for you. There's this enthusiasm about this act that's been passed, and everybody's very excited. Why are they so excited? What are we going to see that's different? What are we going to see in 2021, and 22 and 23 and on because of the passage of this act?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge opportunity, right? We've really come to value the outdoors as never before. And that's reflected in the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which is so exciting. So what we're going to see, because of the Great American Outdoors Act, and because it makes into law full permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we're going to see about a doubling of investment in these places, in parks and trails and greenways and river access and all of these things, from our most iconic national parks down to your local playgrounds. So it's really exciting, and it will be challenging to get that money in the ground, because it is a big expansion of the funding stream, but the need is there. There's an unmet need that stretches back decades as this program has been underfunded. So we're excited to see that money get in the ground, and to see it get in the ground in a more equitable way, and make sure that the communities that are not served and that are underserved do have equal access to the outdoors. Our partners at the Trust for Public Land have done some great research into park access, have found that 100 million Americans don't have a park within 10-minute walk of their home. And then even for those who do, they found that parks serving primarily communities of color are about half the size of parks that are serving primarily white communities. So there's a lot of work to do, and there's so much enthusiasm about getting outside that it's a great kind of confluence of events right now to have a deepening of investment through the Great American Outdoors Act.
So I want to pick up on that a little bit. And John, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I checked out this book that that the AMC is putting out or put out called The Unlikely Thru Hiker by Derek Lugo, who's a New York City comedian. What can you tell me about this book? It sounds as though it's something that addresses this topic, and it also sounds kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's a great book. AMC books. We've got about 80 titles out there now, and one of the books that I'm most proud about is Derek's Unlikely Thru Hiker book, which just came out last year. It's a huge goal for us at AMC to get more folks of color outdoors, but involved with our organization, including taking leadership roles, taking roles on our staff, roles in our volunteer community, roles at our chapter level. And we have been deficient, to say the least, like a lot of outdoors organizations, and just representing the white folks who are well connected. In most cases, white males like me, who have had the privilege of enjoying it. So we want to expand not only AMC, but really leverage the work that Amy has done to make sure that the outdoors is accessible to every community. Everybody knows that we all own the outdoors. It's common in our DNA, and the only way we're going to succeed and push back on things like global warming and climate change and pollution is by working together as the most diverse community we can be. So Derek's book it's a riot. He talks about hiking along the Appalachian Trail, as a Black man, and his experiences along the way, his experiences hiking through different communities. He's got one really funny story. As an AT thru hiker, typically what happens is you get a trail name. So he talks about getting his trail name, and I want to say it's something like Mr. Fabulous, and he goes through why they called him Mr. Fabulous, and then he really said after a short time he started to take ownership and really want to be Mr. Fabulous. But yeah, it's a great read. It's on outdoors.org, and as you said, to have a person of color who is from a major city talk about his experiences along the Appalachian Trail. It really is a good book for anyone to read who wants to kind of get more insight into the challenges and the opportunities we have when it comes to really improving the diversity of our outdoors and the diversity of folks who are involved with conservation and outdoor organizations.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. I'm a sucker for walking literature in general. I love just books about walking, and that fits in. And then the topic itself, irresistible. I'm going to order it up probably after I leave here.
Thank you.
Today. So, Amy, maybe you can address this one. I wanted to talk a little bit about how rivers and waterways fit into all of this. This is Merrimack Valley Magazine. The Merrimack River is very important to us. We have some great local organizations like the Merrimack River Watershed Council who are doing interesting work. And the more I've been kind of listening to what they have to say, the more I understand the importance now of the river. Not just it's important economically, right? It's important in terms of like all sorts of different things in Lowell and in Lawrence and in Haverhill and in our particular area, but it plays this critical role in the ecosystem. So I'm just wondering, how do rivers fit into this puzzle?
Well, Well, we talk a lot in the conservation community about connectivity and the connections across the landscape, migration corridors for wildlife. It parallels over into the recreation community and trails and trail corridors, and how, a trail like the Bay Circuit Trail is also, it's a greenway. The Appalachian Trail Corridor is a huge greenway that stretches up the East Coast and has become a key migration corridor for wildlife. And so these protected corridors are incredibly important, and that's the same for rivers and waterways, right? They're really important for recreation, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund invests in public access to the rivers, because the river is public land, but the banks are not necessarily. So to access the river legally and put in and take out, if you want a boat, you have to have public access, and LWCF has funded countless river access projects for boating and fishing and swimming, public beaches. Cape Cod National Seashore comes to mind. Places where, you think about privilege and how much privilege it is to have waterfront property these days. Public access is really important. And as you said, also from that environmental standpoint, rivers and waterways are corridors. We have in Western Massachusetts, stretching north into New Hampshire and Vermont, south down to Connecticut, we have the Silvio Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge is the only national wildlife refuge in the country whose boundaries are based on a watershed. The entire watershed is the refuge. And so, that provides a level of connectivity through that whole watershed that is incredibly important as we look at the climate changing and species migrating and the adaptation that needs to take place. Protecting those corridors is more important than ever, and also having that public recreation access. The AMC has been building the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail so that you can paddle all the way from the headwaters down to Long Island Sound. So we were celebrating last week the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act with Congressman McGovern, who's been a key leader in Congress to get this bill over the finish line. We were out on the Connecticut River with him celebrating at an access point that was funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And there's an island in the middle of the river that was also purchased using funds from LWCF, where AMC built a campsite for paddlers going down the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail. So all these levels of connection are really something that are important. You see in a place like the Merrimack Valley, which is so densely populated, those trail connections, whether they are water trails or hiking trails like the Bay Circuit, connections into communities and across jurisdictions, where you have this greenway that goes all the way from someone's backyard to the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge or Minuteman National Park. So the beauty of a program like this is that it invests across all those jurisdictions and really helps you see the landscape as a whole, both from an environmental perspective and from that human perspective.
So I before I turn this over to Lou, because Lou's going to have some questions, I wanted to get a little bit personal, if you don't mind, and talk about, this is the sort of work you're doing for someone who loves the outdoors. And someone who feels connected to nature, whatever you want to call it. Sounds like a great gig. Do you have to fight to keep balance between? I'm just assuming you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't love nature, right? Do you have to fight
Absolutely.
to keep some balance in your personal lives where you're still able to get out and hike and mountain bike and snowshoe yourselves? Or is this risk that you're going to end up being, traveling down to Washington, D.C. all the time, and you're going to end up in lawyers' offices, and you're going to lose that feeling of connectedness?
That does happen. I have worked so hard over the past 5 years to get this bill passed through 2 houses of Congress that I can't even tell you how many trips to D.C. I also have 2 small kids, so they're great to get outside, but they don't always give me as much free time as I would like, nor can they hike up all the mountains that I'd like to hike up. So having that balance with with your personal life, and your professional life too is really important. We do these events like the one last week with Congressman McGovern, and we were all talking about how great it was to get outside and remember what it was that we were fighting for in the halls of Congress. So we try to do that as much as possible, and that's where AMC is such a great organization. We have these really active chapters with tens of thousands of volunteers who've gone out and led hikes and talked about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. They did a bunch of hikes to LWCF funded places to really educate people about, how this impacts you right in your backyard. And then we take members of Congress out there and show them the investments in their districts and how it affects communities and their constituents. And that's what ultimately got this done, is connecting those dots for people between the places that they love, the iconic national places, but then also the places right in their backyards that they love, to the money that's gone into there from a particular program, to, the silly acronym of that program, to this piece of legislation that's winding its way through Congress, that needs to get passed in order to really benefit those places. So that's where AMC's work has been pivotal to the whole campaign, and to really getting this done in an incredibly difficult environment, both in terms of the partisan challenges in Congress and COVID and everything else that we've been facing.
Sure. John, what about you?
Yeah, I wish I could do more, Doug. I mean, that's the issue. I was talking with one guy yesterday, and he was, had just been out in the water for a couple of hours, and I had 10 of these Zoom calls yesterday, and by the end of it, everybody's experiencing it, but you're kind of fried on Zoom. This is just too much. So I think one of the keys for me is, and I don't know about other folks, is I think you really have to look at your week with the intention of saying, okay, I'm going to block out time. And I have a 4-year-old, like Amy, a young child, and thinking about, how do I get out with her and do some climbing and hiking. But we were fortunate we got up to the Maine woods a couple weeks ago, and as I had said, had a cabin there and paddled around and hiked a little mountain and did some fishing, and it was a complete joy, to unplug and get out there. So I think, putting it in my calendar has been important, and then trying to discover these local places that Amy was talking about, the Bay Circuit Trail, which, connects to Lawrence and Lowell and goes up to Plum Island and down to Duxbury and Rockland. I mean, it's just a really neat trail to hike into and hike along. It's 230 miles between 128 and 495. Great places, certainly like the Blue Hills Reservation, the Harold Parker State Forest up by us around Andover. I mean, there are just so many great local places that we're so blessed to live in New England that we really don't even have to get in our car to go far to find these places. So I think, making sure you include it in your calendar and really plan for it, because otherwise, I mean, the drill, Doug. The day gets away from you if you don't put it in there with intention.
Yeah. Right, with intention, absolutely. I work remotely part of the time, so I have 2 young kids too. I have one who's 1 and one who's 3. So I've put a lot of miles on the double stroller this summer, and I've been fortunate in some ways. And even a few weeks ago, I did 15 miles on the Bay Circuit Trail. I did Chelmsford to Concord, and the reason why I did it is because I was inspired. We had a writer who wrote something on the Merrimack Valley section of the Bay Circuit Trail that just came out in the September issue, and I was kind of like jealous. I was like, it must have been neat to she walked the whole thing. So I was like, I at least want to see a part. So I had to get out there and put on my walking shoes, and it was even just 15 miles was a pretty wonderful experience. Lou, do you have any questions for John and Amy?
Yeah, I do. I want to start with Amy. And Amy, I'm going to circle back around on you on the Merrimack, and I'm afraid I have to be this guy. You talked about resources in the backyard, and I live on Plum Island. The Merrimack River is literally my backyard, and I've lived along the Merrimack all my life, and we're facing what I think is a crisis here with the combined sewage overflow systems that need to be redone. It's a major fiscal project. It's a huge project. It's going to take independent legislation from Congress to fix it entirely. But are there any ways that this Great American Outdoors Act or the Land and Water Conservation Fund can contribute to some of these in the meantime until we can get some of that major legislation? Who decides where this money goes? What's the process? How do you advocate for a particular project?
Sure, yeah. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund actually has like 9 different sub-programs. And some of them are at the federal level that invest in those national parks, national forests, national wildlife refuges. And then others are at the state level. And the state and local assistance program is the one that does those state parks, local parks, playgrounds, swimming pools, splash pads, like anything and everything. And the state of Massachusetts runs that. They get that money from the Land and Water Conservation Fund every year. And that part of the program is given out according to a formula by population, so that places that have high population, like Massachusetts, get that share kind of per capita. So the state of Massachusetts has been a great partner in implementing LWCF at that level. And they've done fantastic projects. And I think we'll do so many more fantastic projects now that they're guaranteed that, not only strong funding stream, that full funding at $900 million annually, that's nationwide, but that trickles down, but a consistent funding stream so that communities can do long-term planning and think about, okay, what do we need to do to invest in clean water? What do we need to do to invest in land conservation? What do we need to do to invest in recreation access? And they can, have the confidence that that funding stream is going to be there. It's not going to fluctuate wildly anymore the way it has for the past 50 years. And so they at least can count on that piece. And that federal funding becomes the seed money around which other investment can gather, right? You have private investment from nonprofits and land trusts. You have, state level investment, local investment from communities. And so you can get much more bang for your buck. So that will be incredibly important going forward. And then there's other grant programs through the LWCF, including ones that invest in historic battlefields, ones that invest particularly in forests. The Forest Legacy Program is a grant program that invests in working forests and has been incredibly important in Massachusetts to protect drinking water. Like all this land around the Quabbin Reservoir, Brushy Mountain out in central Mass. There's a project now down in south central Massachusetts, I believe impacts the drinking water supply for Southbridge. Called I can't remember, it's like the Emerald Forest Project, that should now get funding because of the Great American Outdoors Act. It was so low down on the national rankings list that if the Great American Outdoors Act had not passed, it would not have gotten done this year. And talking with the folks who run that land trust that's working on that project, they probably would not have been able to hang on and resubmit it for funding next year. If they hadn't gotten it this year. So the Great American Outdoors Act has made a huge difference there already, investing in keeping our forests as forests, which is the most important water investment that you could possibly make. The sewage overflow stuff is incredibly important built infrastructure, but if you invest in natural infrastructure proactively, you require less of that built infrastructure because the trees and the soil will do that filtration for you if you keep forests as forests. And that's something that is incredibly important in New England, as we are losing like 65 acres of forest every day. Harvard Forest did a study on this a few years ago and came up with that figure. It's probably actually more now, because the pace of conservation funding has not kept up with the pace of development.
I want to note that New Hampshire is a part of this issue as well, a significant part of this issue as well. But I just want to ask, just to recap, so the funds are distributed to the states or on the city and town level? In other words, if we want to apply pressure for this money to get spent in this particular direction, do we march on the State House or do we talk to our local town hall?
I think you can do both, right? It's a very ground up program. So cities and towns like submit projects to the state level, but the folks who run the program on the state level in Massachusetts are fantastic, and they really kind of put a lot of effort into helping cities and towns apply, and nonprofit land trusts and others who want to apply for these funds. So I don't think you'll have to march on the State House. You might have to march on the State House to get them some more funding for staff, because the staff that works on this is awesome, but there are relatively few of them. And so, with the budget crunch that's happening right now because of COVID, it's going to be difficult, I think, to get all the funds in the ground, but not for lack of trying, because Massachusetts really does a great job.
All right, John, let me ask you, the Appalachian Mountain Club, talk a little bit about how vital the education part of your mission is, not for the education itself, but to involve more people at different age demographics in the outdoors, so they'll be advocates for the outdoors, realize the importance of it, and continue legislation and continue conservation.
Yeah, it's a great question in terms of, where do we take education now, during these times when we can't get groups together? So we've been thinking about how do we pivot to not only offer more online, but also create some centers of excellence around training teachers, training parents, training youth workers, creating the next generation of naturalists, the next generation of walkers like Doug on the Bay Circuit Trail. So education is a big part of who we are, and what I like to emphasize, it's about lifelong learning. I mean, the four of us and all of our viewers could spend the rest of their days, trying to learn about nature and not even scratch the surface. I mean, it's incredible the amount that we don't know. We're doing a project called the Dragonfly Mercury project, and I speak to this because of the citizen engagement and the learning component to it, that we're getting folks at over 100 national parks now to go out, and they get trained and they go out and they scoop up dragonfly eggs, and dragonflies lay thousands of eggs. So it's not a big deal to lose some. And then they get those eggs measured for mercury poisoning. So we've got one of the best kind of mercury poison mapping around the country because of these citizen scientists. So we found that engagement in doing an experiential education is what we're good at and what we love to do. There are 7,000 varieties of dragonflies, and to think about what folks can learn, not only about dragonflies and the ecosystems that Amy was talking about, but also what they can learn about, in terms of mercury poisoning and pollution and what they can do in their backyard. So we're going to continue to do that, bringing people together, doing the basics of, Doug was talking about getting outdoors on snowshoes with us just a moment ago. But what we try to do is bring together those outdoor experiences with conservation-related learning. Much like Amy was saying, that our chapters, we've got 12 AMC chapters with, tens of thousands of members in these chapters. But when they do trainings, they very much spoke about the work that Amy and AMC was doing around the Land Water Conservation Fund, reappropriation, and the coalition, and what they could do personally. So personalizing education is going to continue to become more and more important. Thinking about how do we pivot and take advantage of, the internet and videos and now Zoom, because we have to do that. And then continuing to get small groups out in learning experiences. And then lastly, that citizen engagement piece, the citizen science piece, we're going to continue to grow that because this army of citizen scientists has been so helpful to us through the years. We've got the country's oldest climate change data from the White Mountains, and we've got people doing phenology studies up and around the mountains, and we've got a group of school students in Maine called Fish Friends that are doing work for us on rivers and streams and waterways up there. So I think, experience and engagement are going to be a key part of our education success, but we're continuing to figure out how to grow that and where can we be best in terms of helping more people get active outdoors and in conservation.
Another aside, by chance, in our September issue, our nature columnist, Sarah Corshane, writes her column on Dragonfly. So if people are interested in this topic, check out the September issue in the Backyard Naturalist, because you'll find out all about this and more. John and Amy, thank you so much for coming on the 495. I really appreciate you carving out the time and talking. I'm thrilled about the great news about the Outdoors Act. I'm looking forward to getting outside myself this weekend. My guests today have been John Judge and Amy Lindholm from the Appalachian Mountain Club and the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having us.